show this morning, of course, and where else but to celebrate the first day that's up at Columbia University. We're delighted to have Joe back, and he's going to be interviewed tonight by another absolutely outstanding and esteemed writer, Jon Meacham, who is Joe's publisher of the book and the executive editor at Random House. And many of you will know Jon Meacham as a best-selling author and one of our leading biographers of American presidents. His most recent huge bestseller is on Thomas Jefferson, The Art of Power, and he has also been the biographer of Franklin Roosevelt, Andrew Jackson, and the forthcoming biographer of George H.W. Bush. So very, very exciting. This is a wonderful book. I had a chance to read it today, just before this evening. And thanks to Miles Nadal and MDC Partners, everyone will take home a copy this evening. Get quite the treat, but you pay attention now, right? So, you will know what to read and what to enjoy. It's a wonderful take by a very creative and independent thinker. You know, Joe is he calls himself a conservative and a Republican, but he spends much of almost every day bemoaning the current state of the Republican Party. And I am a Democrat, and I'm happy to be on the show bemoaning the state of the Democratic Party. And so we find a lot of common cause. I keep thinking we're going to nudge him not only to the pragmatic center, which this book is celebrating, but just over the line, actually. Maybe you can give a little bit of encouragement to that this evening. We're very, very lucky and fortunate, let me call them to the stage, Joe Scarborough and Jon Meacham, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
And have a good time this evening, everybody.
He's leaving now.
I'm starting out. Pick up your book on the way out. Miles Nadal, MDC Partners.
Thank you all.
At the risk of self-parody, Dr. Sachs is now going off to a UN dinner. I know you always said not to be going with him, but we'll do what we can here. I love that this is the global publication day. It's huge of Scarborough's book, which is an important book. I am delighted to be here with my favorite author, at least in the building.
Can we turn up the house lights just to confirm that?
Before I say that, I love being at Columbia because as a Jeffersonian, it's important for us to bring the word to you benighted Hamiltonians as much as possible. One of the things that about Jefferson and Hamilton that you have to remember is at least my guy didn't get shot in Jersey. Take that, King's College. Congressman, congratulations.
Thank you, constituent.
Well done. This is also an act of extraordinary, I think, cultural diversity and ecumenical grace on your part to have a graduate of the University of Alabama and the University of the South here. If you need simultaneous translation, we can arrange that. This is, I believe, as the book's editor, you can take this with a grain of salt. I think this is a hugely important book at an important moment. We have seen in the past 5 weeks, as Joe said this morning, the best of times and the worst of times for the Republican Party. I think we live in interesting times, unquestionably, and as the party tries to find its way forward, there really isn't anyone, I think, more worth listening to, both from an experiential point of view and from his grasp of history than Joe. One of my many character flaws is that I actually like politicians. I like people who take the risk of judgment, who go into the arena who suffer the slings and arrows that we throw at them. And I've known Joe for a long time, both in his congressional days and in his apotheosis in recent years.
I don't even know what that word means. But thank you, I like politicians too.
And so the important thing about this book, and I want to start here, is this is not a screed. This is not a horse race book. This is a historical look at what has worked in the past and what might work again. And so if you are interested in the history of the post-war Republican Party, which anyone interested in American history has to be, then this is an important, I think, book. And the fact that Joe was able to find the time to do it is a great tribute to him. So here's my first question. Congressman.
I thought this moment would never come.
You only get one, so here I go. We're going to, I should tell you quickly, we're going to talk for about 25 minutes and then take questions from you all for the second half of this. You begin the book with a wonderful insight about 2 Augusts 40 years apart. Talk about that.
You know, the book's on the history of the Republican Party, and it's easy to really mark the moment when the party started to collapse, when we stopped being the party that found the middle of the American electorate 5 out of 6 elections. That was Hurricane Katrina. You talk to anybody in the Bush administration, the second Bush administration, they'll tell you it wasn't the Iraq War, it wasn't WMDs, it wasn't Abu Ghraib, it wasn't any of these lists of horribles that happened in foreign policy. They knew they had lost America for good after Hurricane Katrina. And so I started there and then worked my way back. And it was very obvious that the conservative revolution really started in 1966 with the election of Ronald Reagan. And after doing a little bit of research about what caused that, you saw that it was actually what happened in Los Angeles in August of 1965, when some LA cops pushed around an African-American woman in Watts, and things escalated to the point that soon the entire area was on fire. The riots broke out all over Los Angeles. It was the first time that a local TV station had a helicopter, you know, the chopper, the news chopper going overhead. So these images of the burning city, the burning inner city, not only spread across Los Angeles, it spread across California, it spread across the United States. And there were fears of race wars. It horrified middle-class voters, Democrats and Republicans alike. As well as what was going on, 300 miles north in Berkeley. The first time we had really, not violent, but really outspoken protests on the Berkeley campus. And at the time, California voters could be miffed at the fact that these students that were getting a free education, because they got a free education back in 1965, were being such ingrates and being such radicals, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you had all of these things happening at one time, and that was in August of 1965. And it seemed to a lot of middle-class Democrats, middle-class Republicans, middle-class voters, that the world that they knew was starting to come unglued. And we saw that continue over the next year, 2 years, 3 years, with all of the chaos, cultural chaos of the 1960s, whether you're talking about LSD, or you're talking about the sexual revolution, the pill, the Time magazine cover is God dead, all of these, and I remember this from a distance, from a young age of just growing up in a suburb of Atlanta, Georgia, and looking at the world through the eyes of my horrified parents, who couldn't figure out what was going on, and they could not figure out what the hell my sister was listening to. It ended up being Jimi Hendrix and Jefferson Airplane, but it sure didn't sound like Dean Martin and Lawrence Welk did that. And it seemed like the world that they knew was coming unglued. You can really trace, and I'll tell you who else did this, Perlman with Nixon land. Perlman with Nixon land talked about this as well, about, you know, in 1965, and John, you can go into this as well, the belief was the Republican Party was dead. Barry Goldwater had destroyed the Republican Party in 1964, according to the smartest minds, the New York Times and Time Magazine and the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post. In fact, by the middle of 1965, the Republicans, the National Republican Committee, couldn't even make rent on their national headquarters. It was a party in chaos. It was a party being torn apart. And all of that changed. Not only Ronald Reagan, but a lot of candidates across America started campaigning. It started in August of 1965, and a huge off-year election in '66. Reagan was elected as a sort of law and order governor, and the conservative revolution took off there. Republicans had won 5 of the next 6 elections and really gained the center of American politics. And they did that until 40 Augusts later.
The conventional explanation is that out of Watts into '66, the Republicans ran a race-based strategy. The idea, I think many people, I'm sure not here tonight, but reflexively, some people in this zip code might actually think that the
Well,
Republicans...
he's actually at a UN dinner now. So.
But Ronald Reagan, when confronted with charges of bigotry, had his moment. You should tell that story. And talk about to what extent the Republican rise nationally was about, yes, securing a conservative base, but you cannot win national elections. You cannot do what the Republican Party did in the wake of '66 without winning the Senate.
You have to win the center, and I talk about this in the book. It's very interesting that Richard Nixon was always accused of being the mastermind of the Southern strategy, which was supposedly this racist strategy that would drive off African-American voters but get white Democrats and ball weavers to go their direction. Nixon won about 1/3 of the African-American vote in 1960. In '68, he did very well, and also did the same in '72 with African-American voters. I think the real problem came after Nixon with this the party became, I think, encapsulated more of the West Coast party, instead more of a Deep South party, when we just started electing guys like me. And I think there was this belief that it was a predominantly white, predominantly rich, predominantly isolated party. 47% party, let's say.
Right. Pick a number at random.
Just to pick a random number. The fact is, though, that the genius of Ronald Reagan, just like the genius of Margaret Thatcher in Great Britain in the mid-1970s, was neither one of them believed that they were helping the 47%. Like TR, they didn't really give a damn about the 47%. Ronald Reagan, whether you agree with this or not, like Margaret Thatcher, believed that what they were doing was going to help, let's say, an 18-year-old Latino in Los Angeles as much as a 65-year-old hedge fund broker in Greenwich, Connecticut. And because they believed that, and because you had with Reagan a guy that graduated from Eureka College, and you had with Thatcher a shopkeeper's daughter, you actually had Republicans and Tories and conservatives that actually believed in their philosophy and believed that they weren't helping people on Wall Street, believed that they weren't just helping the 47%, believed that lower taxes, lower regulations, more freedom was good for most Americans. And because of that, they won the middle. Think about this, though. In our Republican Party, I said we lost 5 out of the last 6 elections. Look at the people that we've nominated. Mitt Romney, son of a guy that ran Michigan, a CEO of a car company. And 4 years before that, John McCain, his father ran the Navy, or a good chunk of the Navy. Before that, George W. Bush. In 2004 and 2000, his dad ran the New World Order, right? I'm sure he had something to do with the Trilateral Commission, even though that was Mika's father that started that. By the way, Mika wishes that she could be with you tonight. Unfortunately, she had a previously scheduled speech at a Young Marxist League meeting just about 20 blocks south of here.
That's the cheering you hear in the background.
Yeah, exactly. And I know most of you wish you could be there instead. And then, of course, we had Dole 4 years before that. Dole, middle-class guy, working-class guy, when he got into politics. And before that, of course, we had George H.W. Bush. So I don't think it's a coincidence that the guy from Eureka is the guy that connected with middle-class voters the most. And so much of this, too, people say that we're overly ideological. And our Washington Republican Party is overly ideological. But so much of this also has to do with the fact that we just keep nominating people that aren't particularly good candidates. And we keep trotting out amateurs, crazy amateurs, running for Senate races. And we spend the first year and a half of every primary process electing the craziest amateurs that we can find. And it has seriously damaged the Republican brand.
In honor of being at Columbia, we should do a little bit of intellectual history. Lionel Trilling, that great embodiment of American conservatism, who described American conservative thought in the middle of the century as a series of irritable mental gestures, which was a warm and embracing way to do it. Talk about Trilling's critique, talk about Buckley and the importance of ideas, really from Eisenhower forward.
I've never been anywhere with John Meacham that he doesn't bring up Trilling.
It's kind of exciting to hang out with him.
It's really disturbing. I talk about Bear Bryant, he talks about Trilling. Well, how fascinating is it that every time conservatism's declared dead, as Trilling did, you have a William F. Buckley that comes along and kickstarts the conservative movement and the conservative intellectual revolution. The same thing, though, again, it's happened time and time again. The Republican Party declared dead in 1964. They start a conservative revolution in 1966 after Watergate, after Vietnam. Jimmy Carter's elected in 76. 74 is one of the worst off-year elections for Republicans in modern history, and they're considered dead. And actually a punchline I remember on All in the Family in 1976 after Jimmy Carter ran was Archie yelled at Meathead, "It's great, Meathead, but in 80 you get Reagan." And the entire audience laughed because the thought of Ronald Reagan ever being elected anything was so preposterous in the environment of 76 that it really was. It was one of Norman Lear's best punchlines from the year. But time and time again, the conservative movement, Republicans are declared dead on arrival, and time again, they somehow find their way forward. Now the question is whether they can find their way forward now or not, and win in 2014 and win in 2016. Right now, I'm skeptical that we're going to be able to turn things around by 2014, only because you have Republicans fighting Republicans non-stop. We've had an ideological witch hunt over the past 6 months. We've had people standing up on TV stiff, running 30-second commercials, saying if you don't endorse my tactic, my approach to defunding Obamacare, you're not a true conservative. And that approach was tactically idiotic. I said it yesterday on Meet the Press. I was talking to a friend in the Senate who was questioning my conservatism because I was against the idea of shutting down the government unless Barack Obama agreed on a 2-month continuing resolution to defund his landmark piece of legislation that passed. I said, this is like a coach saying if I don't run up the middle on 4th and 31, on my own 10-yard line, I'm not a real man. No, that has nothing to do with your manhood. It just has to do with whether you're a stupid football coach or not. And shutting down the government when you could see it coming, like a slow freight train out of the mist. Shutting down the federal government to try to defund Obamacare was one of the most stupid moves the Republican Party could have made. That would have been like Tip O'Neill doing the same thing to Ronald Reagan, expecting Ronald Reagan to give up his tax cuts. Or expecting FDR, a Republican expecting FDR to give up Social Security. Barack Obama's never going to give up on the Affordable Care Act. He's going to be fighting to make the program work until his last day in office. And the Republicans knew that, or should have known that. I can't overstate the damage that did to our party. That did Ted Cruz's strategy did to our party. We've got the lowest approval rating ever in Gallup, the lowest approval rating the Republican Party's ever had recorded in the NBC News Wall Street Journal poll, the lowest approval rating ever, CBS News, 18% approval rating. Which, by the way, when you hear Barack Obama has his lowest approval rating ever at 41%, that sounds bad until you hear that the Republican Party's approval rating is at 18%.
No, it's Cheney level. The, what, now, to go to
How
your,
many Dick Cheney fans do we have here? Show of hands. We got a couple. There you go. Anybody else? I'm like a Southern Baptist preacher with all eyes closed and all heads bowed. Confess your sin.
this will be the first altar call in the history of Morningside Heights. To go to your Senate friend who said,
Yes.
who raised that question.
Yes.
To what do you say to people
You're a jackass.
who say,
That's what I said. You're a dumb jackass that should not be allowed to use, like, electric blenders, let alone be in the United States Senate. That's what I say to them. If they believe that shutting down the federal government is going to do anything positive for the cause, when in fact, people like myself who disagree with the Affordable Care Act actually believed it would help the president and set back our cause, and we were right.
and when that person puts the blender away and
Right.
says to you, well, you're a rhino. You're just a Republican in name only. You're not one of us anymore. What do you say?
Well, this person I was talking to, I said, hey, we're on the same side here. We're on the same side. You're just going at it the wrong way. You're coming across as being extreme, hateful. You're not offering an alternative. You're not only losing Democratic support, you're losing independent support, and you're losing some Republican support. And if you say that forcefully enough, I think you will get some people actually agreeing with you. I must say, after the whole thing blew up in their face, they were much more responsive to my message than they were when they were standing up going, you know, did they? I don't think they showed those 30-second commercials on the Upper West Side, did they? You know, Ted Cruz commercials? We have to stop Obamacare now. You know, it was about that inspiring. So you didn't miss anything, but they were running these nonstop in other Republican districts, which is unbelievable to me. You talk to people that have like 99% conservative index ratings. They were getting calls from their constituents for weeks, with constituents yelling at them, telling them that they were insufficiently conservative, basically shutting down their entire office. Talking really, really, really conservative people suddenly becoming rhinos because they didn't believe in this tactic. It was mind-boggling. You are seeing Ted Cruz, you're seeing some of these other people back off now, but again, a lot of damage has been done. But if it breaks the fever, then I guess in the long run, it's good for us.
So how do you design, implement a winning strategy? Your view of the right path forward.
Well, it's not about political moderation. It's just not. It's not about finding the mushy middle. It's not about splitting the difference. So often, we vote for candidates that we may not agree with 100%. Republicans, a lot of Republicans, in 2008, voted for Barack Obama because they were inspired. We found one Republican after another Republican in Iowa saying that they were going to vote in the Democratic caucus because they were transfixed by this guy. A lot of Democrats voted, for Ronald Reagan. So much of it has to do with being a strong leader and knowing what you believe in, and quite frankly, not to kick him after he lost, but not being like Mitt Romney and sticking your finger in the air. And 1 second you're pro-life, and the next second you're pro-choice, and 1 second you're, for marriage equality, and the next second you're not for marriage equality, and 1 second you're for, you create Obamacare, and the next second you're against Obamacare. I mean, either it's the best idea. If socialism is bad for America, wasn't socialism bad for Massachusetts? Right? If Mitt Romney says that Romneycare with a new name is socialism, then wasn't it bad when he, so I always thought he should have embraced that and should have been as strong. People love strong leaders. Now, that's why Chris Christie got elected in New Jersey. The question is whether Chris Christie's strength, because that's the question of the hour, is Chris Christie going to be the Republican nominee? I'm not sure, because I don't know if that translates from New Jersey to the rest of America, not because he's a Jersey guy, but because I don't know what Chris Christie's ideas are, even though he's a good friend of mine, other than, hey, you got to get everybody in the room, you got to just talk. Hey, you just got to get things done. Okay, well, what's your idea about crime control? Well, you got to get everybody in the room and talk about crime and get things done. What's your idea about health care reform if you don't like the Affordable Care Act? At the end of the day, we got to get everybody in the room, and you got to knock heads together, and you got to just get things done. Okay. Thank you. I'm not going to ask you about education reform. I know where this ends. So, have you noticed that? Like Chris has been on all of these shows. I just don't know. I like the guy. I think it's really positive that we've got somebody that's actually winning the Hispanic vote, getting 20% of the African American vote, which would be pathetic, except for the fact that we usually get like 1.5% of the African American vote. That he's the first pro-life candidate since 1973, when Roe v. Wade became law, the law of the land, that actually went statewide in New Jersey. Not because I obsess over such things, but just because it shows that a strong candidate, and this is my point, a strong candidate that actually gives a damn about what the center of their electorate thinks can get elected, regardless of their labels, regardless of their looks, regardless of anything. They can win. And I always, when people think and start talking about how Americans are more conservative, Americans more liberal, or this or that or the other, I always remind them, the same people that voted for Ronald Reagan twice, voted for Bill Clinton twice, voted for George W. Bush twice, and voted for Barack Obama twice. The center of, okay. Other than when we stole that 2000 election from you guys, but you were just such suckers. But other than that one Bush thing, thank God Sandra Day O'Connor wanted to retire. But anyway, I digress. Other than that one episode, Americans are not ideological. They're just not. The center of America. And all of these people on talk radio and cable news and on blogs that say Americans are more ideological than ever, they couldn't be more wrong. They really could. Meek and I have given probably, 200, 250, 300 speeches over the past 6 or 7 years, whether it's at college campuses or book events at college campuses. We say the same thing. Whether we're at the 92nd Street Y, or whether we're at Pat Robertson's University in Virginia, we say the same thing. And I've got to tell you, for the most part, most Americans occupy this center space that you would never believe watching cable news at night. At night. No, I'm dead serious. Most Americans are concerned about the debt. Most Americans are obviously concerned about terrorism. Most Americans obviously concerned about America keeping up and being competitive. You've got your extremes on both sides that make a lot of noise. But I'm telling you, there is a wide berth for a center-right candidate to get elected. There really is.
People ask me two things. One is, how does Mika put up with Joe? Right. Number one.
What's your answer?
I say she's actually runs everything.
She does. By the way, can I ask you to state this? We have a couple people that work with us and will tell you this. A lot of times people like tweet really stupid things. Like, I don't understand why Mika lets Joe run all over. Could you explain to people here who runs the show, who runs the office, and who runs 30 Rock?
That would be Ms. Brzezinski.
Yeah.
No, it's true. I mean, it's one of the great misconceptions. I'm terrified of her.
No, we all are. Actually, seriously, we all are. She's like, she plays Lucille Ball on TV.
Tracy Allen meets C-SPAN. She's totally in control of everything. In fact, she just told me in my ear. Move on now.
But you're dead serious.
I'm dead serious.
People don't understand.
Totally serious. Absolutely.
You ever see that Saturday Night Live skit with Ronald Reagan where he was like, he'd like walk around, well, I don't know. Yeah. And then they close the door. Okay, get over here, Baker, you son of a bitch. We're gonna get, and Reagan was totally in control behind the door, which is actually how Ike was. That's also how Mika is.
Yeah, she's the hidden hand president.
It scares us all.
Scares us all. If you all have questions, please, there are microphones in the aisles. I see one anyway. I'm going to ask one while anybody wants to get up.
You can shout it from your seat also.
If you like. Do a quick lightning round. I want to throw a couple of names at you. Just give me a quick reaction. Dwight Eisenhower.
Ike is a guy who was considered this amiable dunce. My mom and her family were huge FDR fans, and I grew up believing that Ike's just sort of doddered around and played golf, because that's what contemporary political writers said of him at the time. We've really seen over the past several years people really digging into the papers and finding out, into his presidential papers, and finding out he was an extraordinary president. 8 years of peace and prosperity. And that didn't happen by mistake. He was an extraordinarily conservative man with a small c. He wasn't ideological. He was rational. He did what he thought was right. When it came to foreign policy, he stood up to generals in the Pentagon. Of course, his famous farewell speech warning about the military-industrial complex. But after Korea, not a war he began, but a war he ended by making a threat that Evan Thomas writes about that he would never carry through, but basically telling the Chinese and the Koreans, take care of this, or we're going to use nuclear weapons on you, which he never was going to do, but he bluffed his way out of that war. And not another American was killed in combat over his 2 terms. This isn't a lot, but I mean, he's really, it's amazing how, and maybe you can talk about it for a second, how historians have changed their opinion of Eisenhower, and how he was one of the most, he was without a doubt, other than George Washington, without a doubt the man most prepared to be president of the United States when he stepped into the presidency. And he showed that for 8 years.
It is an example of the difference between journalism and history, because 2 presidents in that period, Truman and Eisenhower, were both totally as the second President Bush would say, misunderestimated in real time. And
Is there any chance that the second President Bush is misunderestimated?
I may be misunderestimating this, but I have my doubts. The problem is you have to get one thing right. I mean, you have to either get foreign policy or domestic policy, one or the other. And if you have Iraq and you have the economic crisis, it's a tough case to make.
It's a tough.
Two more names quickly. Bill Buckley.
Well, you know, the thing I loved about Buckley was that he obviously he in the face of Trilling, he started a conservative intellectual movement that continued until about 10 years ago, when actually the debate on the right was shut down by extreme ideologues. So if you ever veered out of this straight path, you were considered insufficiently conservative. The other thing I loved about Buckley is that Buckley said ideology is a wonderful thing until it actually has to meet head on with reality. And in 2005, 2006, seeing the error of his ways on Iraq, you know, Buckley said, we thought we were going to change human nature with this war, and we were terribly wrong. It didn't take into account reality. Because it didn't take into account reality, because it was ideological, it was not conservative. And I think, unfortunately, too many people that call themselves conservative really don't understand the historical context of conservatism, whether you go all the way back to Edmund Burke, or whether you talk about Russell Kirk, or whether you talk about Bill Buckley, people that were inherently suspicious of ideology and programs and agendas, where you had this one-size-fits-all ideology that would lead your side to victory and lead America to this utopia on earth. That's about as anti-conservative as you can get.
Let's go here. Sir?
Thanks both for coming. My question is, to what extent has the fear of being primaried kind of changed the direction of the Republican Party over the last few years, affected it, maybe damaged it, and what does that say about the powers that be outside of the Beltway and their effect on the party and the Hill as a whole?
Yeah. You know, that's a great question, and a lot of us will sit and say, well, why didn't the party stand up and take a more aggressive stance? Say Missouri, when my good friend Claire McCaskill basically said, I'm going to give Todd Akin $2 million and hope he wins, because if he does, I'm going to kick his ass. And she did. It's because there were these outside groups that you're talking about, the Senate Conservative Fund, I guess Heritage Action, all these other groups. And they funded the money. The party was impotent to stop, whether it's Christine O'Donnell, or whether it was Richard Murdoch, or whether it was Todd Akin, or whether it was Sharon Engel, whether it was Ken Buck in Colorado. I could go on and on and on. Harry Reid should be going to chicken fights in rural Nevada right now. He should not be Senate Majority Leader. But we, the extremes in our own party, have ensured that he's continued to run the Senate. And the good news is that about halfway through the government shutdown, the Koch brothers are like, okay, we're out of here. Yeah, you know what? We didn't sign up for this. And you had, and I'm really excited, this happened in Alabama 1 down in Mobile this past week. You had the Chamber of Commerce, and you had Joe Ricketts, and you had conservative business interests saying, you know what? We're gonna like sell crazy short, and we're gonna try to help the mainstream conservative candidate, and they did. So all of these outside groups that have been causing damage, I think actually are facing a very serious crisis right now. The crisis is the money that's been flowing in there and allowing the Senate Conservative Fund and allowing Heritage Action to go in and cause damage in primaries. in swing states, I don't think they're going to have the ability to do that. And let me differentiate. There's a big difference between going into Utah and giving Mike Lee money in a state that Republicans are going to win anyways. I'm talking pure strategy here. And going into Delaware, where you have Mike Castle, a guy who's already been governor, running for Senate, against a lady that goes on TV and says, "I am not a witch." This is not a close call. What's wrong with these people?
Tell them about election night when with the rape issue.
Well, somebody said it's really a bad sign when the question is asked, how did the rape guy do? And you got to answer, which one?
The gentleman before me asked my first question, which was about Alabama 1, so thanks for answering that. I also wanted to ask you about what just happened in the Senate, which I saw as a great sign regarding Republican senators signing on the anti-gay bias bill in the Senate. What do you think the long-term outlook is going to be for the Republican Party if things start changing and how our country is changing on gay marriage and gay rights, and how does that fit in with our prospects in the future?
Well, I think you're seeing more and more Republicans moving away from stands that are unpopular. The obsession on social issues that fueled campaigns in the 1980s and the 1990s, and in part even the first part of this century. I think you're seeing a huge movement away from that. I mean, the fact that in 2004, Karl Rove's strategy was to get as many anti-gay marriage votes on as many ballots in swing states as possible, to where we are, like you said, just last week, where you had Republicans voting on the anti-discrimination law. I think shows how far Americans have moved on these issues. And by the way, I think you go issue by issue by issue as far as where Americans are. You can never guess completely where Americans are going on social issues. They've become more progressive when it comes to marriage equity. They've become more conservative when it comes to abortion. Why have they become more conservative when it comes to both of abortion, but more progressive on gay marriage? Because they're pragmatic. They're pragmatic on the one side. Everybody, in 2013, probably has found out that there are quite a few people in their family that are gay, that have come out. Or they have friends that are gay, that want to be married. And on the other side, on abortion, it's very simple. Why? You look at a lot of polls, and Americans are labeling themselves more pro-life now than they did 10 years ago, 20. Why? It really doesn't have anything to do with ideology. It has to do with the fact, and I've got a 5-year-old, and I've got a 25-year-old. I am so exhausted. But anyway, when my 25-year-old was coming along in the womb, the doctor goes, "Hey, would you like to look at your son?" "Yeah." What is that? When Jack was premature, and then, they've got like a 3D imagery. "Would you like to see him for this one?" That's it. And when I saw Jack, maybe he was 3-4 months along, I looked, I see his nose now. I saw his nose, the shape of his nose and his face in that 3D imagery. And I just think that parents going in and seeing their unborn children at earlier stages of pregnancy have made them a bit more conservative on that issue. Now, does that mean they want to ban abortion? They want to overturn Roe v. Wade? No. But does that mean on issues like on Like, for instance, the issue you're talking about. I don't think most conservatives think that somebody should be fired from their job because they're gay or lesbian. I just don't think that. And it's just, I think, a practical decision that we as a nation make, and I salute the Republicans that were willing to set aside ideology and vote that way. And so let's hope, again, that we don't put our feet in cement as we go. Because I think the main issue is, as we move forward, the economy. And how do we as a country compete moving forward over the next 10, 20, 30 years? Whether it's with China or India or all the other countries that are rising up to challenge us.
My question is more of a strategy question. So you take Republican primaries and we get 2 candidates, and I basically eat our young. We take
Right.
one, we push them so far right, and then by the time the election comes, you're sitting there and you're clawing to get back to the middle. You want these candidates to be somewhere in the middle, but how do we get the Republican Party to stop doing that to each other? How do we stop going so far right when their beliefs are more mid-center, and then come that general election, they can't get back there?
Yeah, well, so I ran in a district that Jerry Falwell called the most conservative district in America. And I was pro-life, but I went to the people that cared about that issue and I said, you know, a year and a half ahead, I'm pro-life. You know, check it off the list. I'm not going to be talking about this on the campaign. I'm going to be talking about balancing the budget. I'm going to be talking about, you know, bringing jobs to our area. I'm going to be focusing on what I'm going to be focusing on when I get to Washington. I mean, for us to obsess over an issue like abortion, I think back over the thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of votes that I took over 4 terms in Congress. I don't remember taking a vote on abortion. I'm sure I took some really crazy, stupid votes on abortion. I just don't remember it. And we obsess over these issues that are used, like you said, in primaries as wedge issues. I'm more conservative than you. And then we go up to Washington, D.C., and there's really no practical impact if you're in the House of Representatives. If you're a senator, you're confirming Supreme Court justices, then yes, it does matter. And if you're running for president, the same. But you know, at the end of the day, those issues really are more in the hands of the Supreme Court anyway. And it takes a candidate that's willing to stand up to the extremes of their own party. It doesn't matter what the issue is. And say, listen, okay, I understand that's the most important issue for you. If you want me to go up there and you want me to be rabid on social issues, vote for somebody else. That's important. We've had as a party all these Sister Souljah moments, all of these opportunities. A couple of years ago when Glenn Beck said that the president was a racist, that hated all white people. First of all, I thought it was a stupid thing to say because the president's half white. But what is this, like self-hatred? I don't know. But also I thought it was a very dangerous thing to say at the time. Because I think it inspired hatred, and I was very concerned for the president's safety and the safety of his family. It just was. I'm not being melodramatic. That's a terrible thing to say. I said on air the next day, Mitt Romney has a wonderful opportunity to go out in a Sister Souljah moment and distance himself from that hate speech. He didn't do it. Think about how much more respect not only all of you in this audience would have had for Mitt Romney if he would have spoken out at that moment, but also how many Republicans would have, I'm not saying none of you are Republicans here, but how many primary other Republicans in key early states also would have been inspired. People love leadership. They love strength. They love Reagan. They loved Clinton. They love FDR. They loved strong leaders. I had so many people tell me when I got elected, I was the first Republican elected in my district since 1873, and they hung the last one that they sent up to Washington, so it's a tough district for Republicans to win. I had so many people come up to me and say, you know what, you were so much more conservative than I am. I disagree with you on this issue, but you know what, I know where you stand. Because what I would do is I went out and my stump speech was this. This is where I stand on the issues. And I go, and I'd finish by saying, if you like that, vote for me. If you don't like that, don't vote for me. But do not come up to me 6 months later, shocked and stunned that I voted the way I voted. Because this is what I believe, this is what I'm going to believe when I get to Washington, and it's what I'm going to believe when I leave Washington. Vote for me or don't vote for me. Thank you. Good night. And you know what? They voted for me. I ended up getting 62% of the vote. My crazy parents still don't know what happened to the other 38%. Thank you for helping me with numbers. He knows I went to the University of Alabama. We're not very good at math down there. But we don't have to be, because every year we only have to count to number one. Roll Tide! By the way, we played Notre Dame last year. Do we have any Notre Dame fans here? Any Notre Dame fans? Right here. Oh, great, sir. Hey, what's the name of your imaginary girlfriend? Just an Alabama joke. That's insane. Play real football, have real girlfriends. Just kidding. I'm just joshing with you. I'm reaching out to the middle of America. I'm making fun of it. Roll Tide. I'm sorry.
Can you give us a reason to be optimistic that the insanity of Washington politics will be resolved in the near future and we might actually get something done as a government?
No. I get that. You know, I've got to take it seriously. I'm really concerned, and I'm concerned for this reason. We've got a Republican Congress that is interested in little more than stopping Barack Obama. And we have in Barack Obama a president that has the social skills of my 5-year-old. Barack Obama, the political skills. Actually, I'm sorry, no. Actually, Jack has better political skills than Barack Obama. You know, I've met him. Meek and I spent like an hour and a half in the Oval Office talking to him. I like him. I'm good friends with his closest advisors. I respect him. He's a smart guy. I disagree with him ideologically. But John will tell you this, and other people will tell you this, that have worked with him. They don't know how to reach out to people that are trying to knock their head off. I know that sounds strange. Tip O'Neill was deeply offended by Ronald Reagan's ideology. But Ronald Reagan called Tip O'Neill early on and said, listen, we have a rule. At 6 o'clock, we'll fight like hell till 6 o'clock. And at 6 o'clock, we're going to get together. And we're going to be friends. They had that relationship. So when there was a crisis with Social Security in the early 1980s, they got together, they stood shoulder to shoulder, and they said, we're going to all get killed. We're going to all get killed politically. But let's stick together and get this done. And they did. You know, there's a great story in Richard Reeves' book on Ronald Reagan. And this shows what happens when you have a president and a speaker that know how to work together. The low point of Ronald Reagan's presidency was when the Marine barracks in Beirut was bombed. 240 Marines were killed that Sunday morning. And Tip O'Neill called an emergency meeting, got all the Democrats together. They were sure that Tip O'Neill was going to tell them, this is going to be what we're going to say moving forward. This is how we're going to take advantage of the president's terrible political strategy and military strategy. Instead, Tip O'Neill got them all assembled, and Richard Reeves reports that O'Neill said, today we're not Democrats. Today we're all Americans. And if anybody in this room decides to criticize our commander-in-chief in this time of crisis for America, you won't have Ronnie Reagan to answer to. You'll have Tip O'Neill. It's unbelievable that actually grown-ups used to run Washington, D.C. And they had built a close relationship, even though they couldn't disagree with each other's governing philosophy anymore. And the Democrats, of course, didn't say a word until Reagan and O'Neill talked about 3 weeks later. And Reagan said, yeah, let's go ahead and have the debate. Thank you so much. And I think, and John, I'm the Republican, you were the pot-smoking left-wing historian. If you could, John, look at him. He went to Swanee, for God's sake. He's never smoked pot.
That's true.
Okay. You should see him, though, around like Tennessee moonshine.
That's
oh,
true. That's true.
Yeah. But I don't.
It is an important cash crop.
It is. I don't want to sound overly ideological here, but we do have a problem, I think, with the president and obviously Congress. And it's not just the crazies on Capitol Hill that are contributing to the problem.
No, it's systemic dysfunction, and I think we are all responsible too. That's the other thing we have to remember, is that, as Jonathan Rauch wrote now 25 years ago, scarily, there's a kind of demosclerosis at work in the country. You know, if we were to sit down and try to decide how we were really going to put ourselves on a path to growth, that would require debt service and some limitations and entitlements and various benefits, you and I would manage, I think, to find something we wanted to protect in that budget. And so that leads to a kind of sclerotic effect in the debate. But that's why we have, in the Democratic Republic, a role for a president.
Right.
The president is supposed to lead us to see some better angels of our nature. Not that the kingdom of God is going to appear, but that we'll get to 51% every once in a while. And that, to my mind, that's part of the issue.
And let me just say, I was going to talk about demosclerosis as well. So I'm so glad, John, that you did that.
Glad I came up with this.
Yeah, so let me give you very briefly a reason to be helpful. Our system works. In 1992, Bill Clinton was elected as a New Democrat. He lurched too far left. Republicans were elected in 1994 for the first time in a generation. We lurched too far right. And we helped re-elect Bill Clinton in 1996. Barack Obama was elected as a New Democrat in 2008. A lot of Americans think he lurched too far left. Elected basically a Tea Party Congress in 2010, who Americans think lurched too far right. Barack Obama got elected in 2012. You know, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, when we had the economic crisis, we were running over $1 trillion deficits every single year. It was unsustainable. We elected a Congress that Americans wanted to check on the spending. They wanted to check on the bailouts. They wanted to check on the president's health care plan. And they got it. And maybe they got too much of it, but they'll self-correct. They always do. I mean, we always find a way forward. You know, Bismarck said that there is a divine providence for fools, drunkards in the United States of America. And Bismarck was right. We do always find our way forward. I still think Jimmy Carter was a perfect anecdote to Watergate. A peanut farmer from Plains, Georgia. Was he up to the job? Maybe not. But for that time and that place, our history, what a great message that sent, not only to Americans, but also to the world. And Ronald Reagan, I think, was a good anecdote to that. Bill Clinton was a good anecdote to that, sort of a softening of the Reagan era. We're still trying to sort through George W. But I think, you know, we'll find our way forward. If Americans lurch too far left, or Congress lurches too far right, or the president lurches too far left, we'll self-correct next year in elections.
I promise a very quick question here, so it's our last one.
We'll get there. I promise. Yes or no answers here.
Demosclerosis, yes.
Your show's pretty moderate, sort of a lot of different views. Chuck Todd, who I have a lot of respect for, explains things in a smart way. If you all weren't doing well ratings-wise, you'd probably be off the TV, off television. So my question is, why is it that MSNBC can really, really do well with these type of middle-of-the-road programs explaining things, but then at night it swings all the way to the left? Why can't MSNBC?
Well, you know, I'm so glad you asked that question. I have MSNBC's PR person here to make sure that I don't answer it. Lauren, would you like to take a swing at it? All I will tell you this, I will tell you this, not talking, of course, about my network. I will only talk about our show. When we started the show, they had very low hopes for us. I mean, look at it. I mean, in fact, Tom Brokaw, after the first show that I was on, and it didn't bomb, he said, Scarborough, who knew? But we moved forward, and we actually, this format that we have, it's 3 hours. We talk about Syria for 15 minutes. We talk about heavy issues in 15-minute segments instead of 3 or 4 minute segments about Britney Spears or Miley Cyrus. It's worked. And it's made a lot of money for MSNBC and for NBC and for Comcast and for whoever is above God, I don't know, everybody. And the food chain has made a lot of money off of what we do. And that's a really, I think that's a good sign, because I said something on Meet the Press yesterday that, of course, liberals on Twitter went crazy about. I said, try not to be overly partisan. And of course that gets liberals laughing, but you know, you ask Ted Cruz or Mitt Romney or George W. Bush or one Republican after another, whether I go after both sides, and they go, oh yeah. And it actually, Americans want that. And you know, sometimes I go on in the morning, I just sound like a total jackass. You know, I'm just tired, I've had a bad night, I go like, ah! But I apologize. I mean, we've got a new catchphrase at the end, which is like, thank you for your patience. But I think it's like politics. You know, people like the show because it's real. We don't have teleprompters. We don't have scripts. We just say what's on our mind and what's in our heart, and it seems to work. And I think that's a pretty good model for the future. I can't watch. Of course, I'm not talking about our network. I just love our network, everything that's on our network. I don't have time, though, to watch shows, let's say on other networks, where I know what they're going to say before the show starts. I won't mention anybody's name, but there's one guy that I'm confused for once in a while in airports. I know what he's going to say beforehand. I just see the Republican Party talking points, and I know where he's going to go. That's boring. So yeah, let's hope let's hope there will be other shows that go on where you actually don't know where somebody's going to go.
Young people today in politics compared to this sort of adage in the past, number one. And number two is, why aren't young people angrier? If you're a young American today and you're looking out in the future and you're saying Social Security is effectively bankrupt, I live with my parents, I have no health insurance, et cetera, et cetera. Why is it there more anger amongst the youth?
I'm sorry, why is it what?
Why is it there more anger or frustration?
Yeah. They seem pretty pissed off to me.
Can I quote you? Let me quote you back. We were sitting on the set. It was cold. I can't remember where it was. It was somewhere in the city on Election Day 2004.
Right.
And people were saying around the table, John Kerry, once the young people come out for him, it's really good. And you said, I cannot tell you how many non-colleagues I have who were waiting for the young people to show up and did not win.
Yeah, it's too often the young people just don't get out and vote in numbers to make a difference. And what I said that night was that, you know, it's just like the bride waiting at the altar for the groom to come. And he never comes. The young people don't vote. I always said, you know, I had people in my district ask me, younger people in my district ask, well, why don't you advertise where young people, get young people inspired to go? I said, because young people don't vote. I have a limited number of resources. Am I really going to, put my money on an alternative music station in Pensacola, Florida? Or am I going to go give milk and crackers out, like at rest homes? This is an easy call. I want to win. I'll listen to alternative music on the way to the rest home. If there are any cameras here, I'm just joking. I'm making this stuff up. I love the kids. I love the old people. So actually, are young people any different today than it really depends on where we are. I know back in 1977, 78, 79, we were coming out of all of the cultural and social revolutions of the 60s that really fed, that really the 70s with the 60s. And suddenly, in 1980, young people started darting towards Ronald Reagan. Huge numbers. A guy who was 69 years old when he got elected. He was 73 in 1984, won by huge margins among young voters. Why? Because Jimmy Carter seemed weak to young voters, and Ronald Reagan seemed strong and assertive, and he got the hostages out, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This all changes. And all of these people who in 2008 and 2012 have said conservatives have lost young voters forever. Crazy. The fact of the matter is, if you're young and you graduate from Columbia and you get a job and you start looking at your paycheck as it gets bigger and you start seeing more and more taxes taken out, and you read the New York Times and you see that that number is going to continually to exponentially increase as we move forward over the next decade, because there are more and more baby boomers graduating. By the way, I'm retiring. How many baby boomers do we have in the audience? Right? Okay. Raise your hand. Be proud, man. This is a generation to change the world. Raise your hand. Raise your hand high. You all are the scourge of humanity. I tell you, the scourge of humanity. So self-consumed. In the 60s, you gave us Woodstock. 70s, you gave us disco and polyester. In the 90s, you gave us Bill Clinton. We can stop there. And now you're going to bankrupt. You know when FDR passed Social Security, life expectancy was what? You know, it was 62. You didn't get your first Social Security check until you turned 65. Now, this is a government scheme that even a conservative like me can support. You pay in your whole life and you die before we give you your first check. There are 40 people working for every one person on Social Security today. There are 3 people working for every one person on Social Security. 20 years from now, there are going to be 2 people working for every one person on Social Security. If you're young, this concerns you. Because 70, 75, 80% of your paycheck is going to be going to pay government programs. And by the way, not government programs that invest in the future, that invest in education, that invest in infrastructure, that help us walk through Kennedy JFK Airport in less than 80 hours. Airports in New York City, can I just say, I love the city, they suck. They're awful. They're breaking down. The only airport that's worse than JFK is LaGuardia. My God. A little spring shower. We're number 48. I've lived here 10 years. I can complain about this now. The infrastructure in this country is a joke. We are a third world country. Our bridges are collapsing. Our airports are collapsing. Go to China and look at what they are doing with their infrastructure. I have never been to China, but I know smart people that have. They tell me. In fact, I haven't left New York City in 10 years. I'm kidding.
I want to thank all of you.
We got 3 more questions. Yes, no, yes.
Thank you all very much. Miles Nadal is our sponsor this evening, MDC Partners. The book is outside. The book is wonderful, as is the author. Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you.